Hello, AP Psychology students. Mrs. Mathers coming to you today again with another PowerPoint. This time, our topic, we're beginning Unit 3, and the topic is sensation and perception. So we're going to start with sensation concepts today, and then we're going to move on to vision, perception concepts, and then we'll actually take a look at sleep and dreams in this unit as well. So in the pictures in front of me, I will show these pictures in class and ask what you think. You know, I get things on the top like, oh, somebody has been just bludgeoned to death with a sword and that's their blood on the wall. That's a little bit morose, I think. But I come up with a variety of answers on that one. Other people think it's like a sailboat, but they're not really sure why. And then some people get it right. It's a ship. Okay, so take a close look at that and you'll see the ship. On the bottom, that's a lot easier to see. Some people think it's like two kids in bathing trunks or something like that, but it's actually, if you follow the lines, it's an elephant. So what we're going to look at today, like I said, is sensation and perception. As I look at this picture right now, I see it going into the tunnel. It looks quite clear to me that it's going into the tunnel, but oops, it just switched. Now it looks like it's coming out of the tunnel. What's really cool about our brains is that we're designed to perceive things in a particular way. When we talk about perception, we're going to talk about the Gestalt psychologist who believed that our brains were wired for survival. And even though that image, like the other one I showed with the spinning girl, is just going back and forth, our brains are likely to create a direction for that image. Dr. Oliver Sacks, I've talked about before, and he actually wrote a book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. He was really fascinated by perception, and he gave a man a rose, something that looked just like that picture there. And he asked the man to describe it, and he said it is a red efflorescence. It has a green sprouting, and he gave this very elaborate description of what that object was, but he could not identify it. He could not tell you that a rose was a rose or a glove was a glove. In fact, when he left the doctor's office, he actually grabbed his wife's head as if it was his hat. So what he had was a problem with his parietal lobe and a problem in perception, not in vision. He could see just fine, but he couldn't perceive. And that was one of Dr. Sacks's other stories that he tells us about. So here is another example of just taking a look. This is something I like to do in class, and see if you can figure out what these two are. And I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to leave you guessing. This is a fun picture, and something will pop out to you right away in this picture, and that is the faces. It's quite obvious that faces are actually embedded in this picture. And what's interesting about faces, it's the first thing that we see when we're born. The first thing that we can identify as infants are the two eyes and the mouth of our caregiver's face. And so it's something that we call part of our schema, something that we see in a lot of different things. We see faces. I see them in barns when they have two windows and a door at the bottom. I see it in the front of the car with the headlights looking like two eyes and the grate looking like a mouth. So count how many faces you see in this picture. All right, when we talk about sensation, we are talking specifically about the stimulation of the sensory receptors and how they produce a neural impulse. So our senses are our sense of sight, sense of sound, sense of touch, sense of smell, and sense of taste. Each of these sensory organs has a specialized set of neurons and receptors that will take in the external information from outside of us and turn it or transform it or transduce it, that's the word transduction, into a neural impulse that will go to our brain where we will begin to understand it. It is a fascinating process, really, to think of the fact The sensation, while we think of it as something being something outside of us, it is still something that we experience within our bodies, and our brain has to process it. The perception then is how we select, organize, and interpret information into something meaningful. And to do that, we use our schema. And our schema is our mental model of the world, based on experience, based on your age, based on life. And we'll talk more about perception later on. Today, I'm just going to talk about some basic sensation concepts. So first of all, sensation concepts have been studied from back at the beginning of the era of psychology in a branch of psychology called psychophysics. Psychophysics is still an important branch of psychology, and it is specifically concerned with how physical stimuli are translated into psychological experiences. Gustav Fechner was a pioneer of psychophysics, and in fact, he knew Wilhelm Wundt, who was the father of psychology. Gustav Fechner, he had this habit. He kind of liked looking at the sun for a little bit too long. He was sort of fascinated with the spots that you saw, but he actually burned his retinas, and he had to go into hiding for a couple of years into the dark so that his retina could repair. Now, I don't recommend that you ever look at the sun, because that will cause potentially permanent damage to your vision. So it is important for you to know right now just the basic definition of the word stimulus. A stimulus is any form of energy that produces a response in a sense organ. This will vary in type and intensity depending on the sensation that we're talking about. So we have a photochemical reaction in our eyes. We have a chemical reaction in our nose and in our tongue. And we just, depending on which sense it is, we have different types of energy. So an important concept here is a threshold. Now, if you were in class, you would see a demonstration where I take a watch and I gradually take the ticking watch farther and farther away from the student's ear. Now, when I do this with, say, 3 or 4 students, I show that the type of intensity that each student hears is a little bit different. So when I'm measuring something called absolute threshold, what I'm looking at is a place, a point of intensity, that's what's down here, and the percent who can detect that stimulus 50% of the time, and that will be what's called the absolute threshold, or the smallest level of stimulus that can be detected. Now, there are some absolute thresholds that have been researched, and I'll just mention them here. About 50% of people will be able to taste 1 teaspoon of sugar in 2 gallons of water. This is a little bit obscured by my picture, but in a very, very, very dark night, or if you've been in a cave or something like that, you know that a candle flame seen at 90 miles on a dark night, or I'm sorry, it can be seen at 30 miles on a clear, dark night. A drop of perfume can be smelled and diffused throughout a 3-room apartment. The tick of a watch under quiet conditions, you can hear at 20 feet. And I don't know who took all the wings off the bees, but a wing of a bee falling on your face from the height of 1 centimeter is considered the absolute threshold. So remember, the absolute threshold, the minimum amount of stimulus that one can detect. Now, another threshold is the just noticeable difference. Now, when my students look at this picture, I ask them to identify which one you think is closer or clearer, rather. A just noticeable difference, or JND, is the minimum stimulation needed to detect a change from the original stimulus. Do you see a difference between the PS3 and the Xbox 360? Many people would say that you can, and therefore that would be a just noticeable difference. Now, who cares about just noticeable difference? Of course, people who are concerned with the clarity of a gaming system, for example. Photographers are concerned with just noticeable difference, and engineers are concerned with just noticeable difference. So just noticeable difference follows something called Weber's law. Now, Weber was a relative of Fechner's. They all kind of seem to know each other. And so Weber describes the just noticeable difference as a constant proportion of the intensity of an initial stimulus. So in other words, if we had a dark room and we had one candle on a birthday cake, and then we put on a second candle, would we notice that difference? Yes, we would. In fact, if we had 59 candles and we added one more, we would still notice the difference. But if we had a cake like the bottom one, which is about how many candles I need on my cake nowadays, well, we wouldn't be able to notice the difference if we added one more candle. So these are some of Weber's law. Wait about 1/10 more and you'll notice the difference. Saltiness, 1/5 more. I make really good chicken noodle soup. If I don't think it's quite salty enough, I'm going to have to add 1/5 more of what I originally added into my recipe in order to notice the difference in the saltiness of my soup. Loudness, you only need 1/10 more. So if you think of someone who calibrates the clicks on an iPhone or a sound device of some kind, they would want to know that information. Brightness, we notice just a 1/60th difference, and pitch, we notice the difference of only 1/333rd. That's a very, very slight difference that we can notice in pitch. Now, I'd like you to take your eyes and gaze on one of the yellow dots. Just look at it and pause the video if you need to. I'd like you to look at it for about 15 seconds without blinking if you can. Okay, so if you're like me and most people in my class, if you're staring at one yellow dot, the blue dots will continue to move, but one or both of the other yellow dots will disappear. So why is this? Well, it's called sensory adaptation. It's a gradual decline in sensitivity to prolonged stimulation. The brain just doesn't fire the nerve cells and nor the sensory receptor as frequently because it doesn't need to. It's noticed the information, and if we felt stimulus all the time, every single stimulus, we would be completely overwhelmed. So the reason why our senses adapt is to allow us to notice threats to our safety or changes in our environment. For example, natural gas companies put the smell of rotten eggs in a gas leak. And I actually had one in my front yard, and I got home and I was like, wow, something really smells. And I called the gas company and they came over and they detected that actually there was a pipe that burst in my front lawn. Had I gone over it with my lawnmower, I could have potentially had an explosion. So it's the sensory adaptation. Normally, we don't smell our own house, the smell. And that's why the gas company puts in that really strong rotten egg smell so that we notice that danger if it's there. Okay, so I'm going to put a couple of videos online today, or for today. I don't want to put them, play them on this recording because this recording is getting kind of long, but I really want you to watch the Whodunit video, and I'm also going to include a door study video and another one on subliminal perception as well. So I'd like you to look at selective attention. So selective attention is when we only attend to aspects of the environment most important to us. One of the things that's really interesting about this is if you go into a crowded room and you can hear your own name, or you can listen for a voice you're listening for, even if it's not actually louder. I can hear my husband's voice no matter how loud he's talking because I'm so tuned into it. I know it so well. I've been with him for so long. We are all sensitive to our own name. So if we hear someone say our name, we're going to look in that direction. Again, we're going to be able to select out what we want. Sometimes we fail to notice changes in our environment because of focused attention. So like I said, please look for the videos for today, the Whodunit, the door study, and then one more that I'm going to show you later on in just a minute. So change blindness is failure to notice changes in our environment because of that focused attention. And I think you'll like those couple videos. And then inattention blindness is failing to notice objects because attention is focused elsewhere. Change blindness and inattention blindness, they're basically two sides of the same coin. All right. Now, when we look at logos, logo designers know very well concepts in perception. And one of the things that they do is they very cleverly put in these designs that at a subconscious level we might notice. We might not at a conscious level, but we might notice them at a subconscious level. I really had not noticed the forward arrow in FedEx until someone pointed it out to me. Now it's the only thing I see. The other thing I had not noticed about Tostitos was two people sharing Tostitos around a bowl of salsa. So this is a clever use of a perception concept. Of course, we've got the smiley face for Amazon.com. And then we have a short ad here, and this was one that was done during the Bush and Gore campaign season. So just take a look at this one.
Under Clinton-Gore, prescription drug prices have skyrocketed and nothing's been done. George Bush has a plan. Add a prescription drug benefit to Medicare.
Every senior will have access to prescription drug benefits.
And Al Gore? Gore opposed bipartisan reform. He's pushing a big government plan that lets Washington bureaucrats interfere with what your doctors prescribe. The Gore prescription plan, bureaucrats decide. The Bush prescription plan, seniors choose.
Okay, so this is an interesting example of subliminal persuasion. If you did not see what the subliminal persuasion was in there, I'm going to ask you to go back to that video, back it up, and see if you can find the word rats. It goes down across the screen, and it's technically illegal by the standards of the FCC. The video that is really, really convincing when it comes to this type of subliminal messaging is one by Darren Brown. And again, I'm going to ask you to watch that one, and that's going to be very important. Now, this is an ad that is sort of a textbook ad for this subliminal messaging that I've been talking about. Many people don't really notice the letters in the ad, but it actually spells out SEX if you look here. Now that is with great intention. A lot of companies, when they do ads, will put something in the ad that will catch somebody at an unconscious level. And so these are called subliminal messages. These are messages that occur outside our conscious awareness, but below the absolute threshold. So what happened is supposedly a movie theater owner said that he had placed a very brief ad that said, eat popcorn, drink Coke. Okay, so he claimed then that he sold more popcorn and more Coke. And this got people really worried, like, oh my gosh, are we going to be taken over by communists? Are they giving us subliminal messages? Well, that was pretty largely discredited. The whole concept of subliminal messaging was discredited. However, recent research does show that subliminal messaging does occur. And again, I've mentioned this video by Darren Brown. You really must watch it. I will put on the Schoology page, must watch, because Darren Brown is a mentalist, and mentalists know how to manipulate the unconscious in a way that is really shocking, actually. So I wouldn't be worried on a daily basis about, whether or not you're having subliminal messages being fed to you and they're making you think in a certain way. But I would really like you to be aware that there are things that affect us unconsciously that we are not aware of. So what may occur is priming. Priming is making our brain ready to perceive a stimulus in a certain way. Here is what the beginning of Darren Brown